Section 15 of The Magic of the Horseshoe. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by docdlmartin. The Magic of the Horseshoe by Robert Means Lawrence. Superstitious Dealings with Animals, Part 2. Roman 5. Images of animals and birds used as charms. The belief that cities or towns may be protected from the incursions of noxious animals, birds, or insects by an image or figure representing one of these creatures is of great antiquity. This seems to be on the principle of the homeopathic doctrine, like cures like. A homely illustration of the same idea is afforded by the shrewd farmer who hangs up a dead crow in his cornfield to protect the crops. On the other hand, the eccentric French writer Antoine Mizault recommended the following as an effective charm for attracting a large number of crows to one spot. As soon as the constellation of the Virgin rises above the horizon, the figure of a half-crow is to be painted on a piece of cloth while these words are repeated. Let no crow in all this district move away without coming to this image, in whatever spot it may be buried. The piece of cloth with its magical figure is then interred, and the charm is complete. Apollonius of Tyana, in Cappadocia, the philosopher and pretended magician of the 1st century, is said to have freed Antioch from scorpions and flies by means of the brazen image of a scorpion. The French bishop Gregory of Tours mentions an ancient popular belief that no serpents or dormice were to be seen in Paris. In his time, however, or toward the close of the 6th century, while workmen were removing the mud which covered one of the arches of the bridge of Paris, they found embedded therein 2 brazen images of a serpent and dormouse, which were taken away, and thenceforth, he says, the city was infested by prodigious numbers of dormice and snakes. In Jean-Baptiste Thiers' treatise on Superstitions, Paris, 1679, we find allusion to a serpent of brass at Constantinople, which long served as a talisman to bar the entrance of living serpents. But when the city was captured by Mahomet II in 1453, that monarch broke the teeth of the image by the force of an arrow shot, and immediately a legion of serpents attacked the inhabitants, but without doing them any harm, for the teeth of all were broken. In the reign of Charlemagne, it was customary in Piedmont to use a formula for blessing holy water with which to drive away noxious animals from the crops, and with such success that not a single mole could be found in the whole town of Aosta, nor within 3,000 paces beyond its boundaries. Mr. Andrew Lang, in his volume entitled Custom and Myth, says that, in a church of a certain old Saxon town, the verger is wont to exhibit to visitors a silver mouse dedicated to Our Lady, explaining that the town was infested with mice until this now precious relic was presented by some ladies as a propitiatory offering, whereupon the creatures disappeared at once. According to the ancient doctrine of signatures, the therapeutic virtues of plants were indicated by certain peculiarities of their external appearance. Thus, Dracontium, or great dragon, a plant which has a fancied resemblance to this mythical monster, was thought to be a preservative against serpents, and the scorpion grass, Myosotis, whose flower spike was not unlike a scorpion's tail, was deemed an antidote to the stings of noxious insects. Indeed, the old herbalists of England claimed by the sole use of herbs not only to cure all fleshly ills, but to drive away or keep at a distance wolves, leopards, and all venomous wild beasts. In Tibet, According to L. Ustine Waddell, M.B., ferocious mastiffs are permitted to roam at large in the night, a source of terror to wayfarers, who therefore carry about charms consisting of the picture of a dog muzzled and fettered by a chain terminated by the mystic and all-powerful thunderbolt scepter, while along the dog's body are written certain Sanskrit magical sentences. Roman 6. Words used as charms. The English word charm is derived from the Latin carmen, a verse, and the magical potency of a sentence used as a charm was believed to rest in the words themselves, and not in the person who uttered them. In the opinion of the Kabbalistic magicians of the Middle Ages, the power of a charm of words depended upon its being unintelligible. The Latin poet Varius wrote in the 1st century BC that old women, by the sole use of words as charms, were able not only to restrain and subjugate wild animals and serpents, but also to drive away noxious creatures and vermin. Few early writers allude to this practice, which appears, however, to have been much in vogue in different countries towards the close of the medieval period. The Swiss theologian Felix Hammerlein, 1389 to 1457, wrote of a peasant living near Zurich who was able, by repeating a magic formula, to rid infested premises of adders, vipers, lizards, and other reptiles. And in some parts of Normandy it was a custom formerly to place small rolls of hay under the fruit trees. The hay was then set on fire by means of torches carried by young children, who repeated meanwhile, "Mice, caterpillars, and moles, get out of my field. I will burn your beard and your bones. Trees and shrubs, give me 3 bushels of apples." Hampson remarks that this incantation somewhat resembles one employed by the ancient Grecians against beetles, whom they held responsible for the destruction of their corn. These magical lines are thus translated: "Fly, beetles, the ravenous wolf pursues you." It was currently reported among the ancients that the famous philosopher Pythagoras not only possessed the faculty of predicting storms and earthquakes, but that he had by a magical word been enabled to tame a Daunian bear, and had also prevented an ox from eating beans by whispering in his ear. Antoine Mizot, the French physician and astrologer, affirmed that, according to Ptolemy, in order to drive away serpents, one should prepare a talisman by engraving the figure of 2 serpents upon a square piece of copper and pronouncing a charm of words as follows: "With this image I forbid serpents to harm anyone, and command them to leave the place where it shall be buried." In like manner, says the same authority, to expel rats and mice, one has only to represent an image of one of these creatures upon a piece of tin or copper, and at the proper time, as determined by astrology, command them to depart. In order to expel snakes, insects, and vermin from their dwellings, the Bulgarian women of Turkey, on the last day of February, endeavored to frighten the creatures by beating copper vessels all over the house, while shouting, "Out with you, snakes, scorpions, flies, bugs, and fleas." One of the vessels is then taken into the courtyard, the pests being expected to follow it, and in Surfo, an island of the Grecian archipelago, at the commencement of the vintage a bunch of grapes is thrown into each house to expel the vermin, while this formula is repeated: "The black grape will sicken you. The black grape will poison you. Out with you, rats and fleas." In Albania, when locusts or cockchafers devastate the fields, a number of women, having caught some of the insects, form a mock funeral procession and proceed to drown them in some convenient stream. And while on their way thither they chant in turn the following dirge, which all repeat in chorus: "O locusts, O cockchafers, parents kind, orphaned, you have left us all behind." And this proceeding is thought to be destructive to the whole swarm of insects. The following charm against foxes was formerly used in France and was to be repeated thrice a week. Foxes, both male and female, I conjure you in the name of the Holy Trinity, that ye neither touch nor carry off any of my fowls, whether roosters, hens, or chickens, nor eat their nests, nor suck their blood, nor break their eggs, nor do them any harm whatever. The Roman Catholic Church formally sanctioned the use of certain sentences as charms against vipers, and the following may serve as a specimen. I conjure thee, O serpent, in this hour, by the 5 holy wounds of our Lord, that thou remove not out of this place, as certainly as God was born of a pure virgina. Otherwise I conjure thee, serpent, by Our Lady Saint Mary, that thou obey me, as wax obeyeth the fire, and as fire obeyeth water, that thou neither hurt me nor any other Christian, as certainly as God was born of an immaculate virgina, in which respect I take thee up. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Otherwise, O vermine, thou must come as God came unto the Jews. When a Turk chances to encounter a serpent, he is wont to invoke the aid of Cha Miran, the Serpent King, and in the name of this deity he bids the reptile depart. Now, Cha Miran has long been dead, but the astute Turk reasons that serpents are not aware of this fact, for if they were, the human race would be helpless against their attacks. As preservatives from the stings of insects, and to prevent the croaking of frogs, the Muslims use scraps of paper containing magical formulae or sentences from the Koran engraved on stones or pieces of metal, and a method formerly in vogue in France to protect pigeons from the incursions of scorpions consisted in writing the word Adam on each of the 4 walls of the pigeon house. The natives of Mirzapur, in cases of scorpion bite, recite a charm meaning as follows: Black scorpion of the limestone, green thy tail and black thy mouth, God orders thee to go home. Come out, scorpion, at the spell, come out, come out. The following charm against insects is in vogue in Lesbos. In the evening, a black-handled knife is stuck in some spot where the insects congregate, and certain Greek verses are repeated, of which the following is a translation. I got 3 naughty bairns together, one a wasp, one caterpillar, and a swarming ant the other. Whate'er ye eat, whate'er ye drink, hence avant, to the hills and mountains flee, and unto each fruitless tree. The knife is to remain in the same spot until the next morning, and is then to be removed. This completes the charm, and the insects are expected to depart at once. In Great Britain, there formerly prevailed a belief that rats could be rhymed to death by anathematizing them in metrical verse, a practice mentioned by Shakespeare and contemporary poets, and which is even today not wholly obsolete. In southern Germany, during the campaigns of Napoleon I, mice with inked feet were placed upon the map of Europe, and their tracks were held to foretell the routes by which the French soldiers would advance. The Hindus consider the rat to be a sacred animal, and among the lower classes of the natives of western India, it is thought unlucky to call a rat by his own name, so they speak of him as the rat uncle. Romans 7. Superstitious dealings with wild animals. In encountering a wild animal, the ancients deemed it a matter of great importance that a man should see the beast before the latter was aware of a human presence. If a wolf, for example, first perceived the man, the brute was master of the situation, and the man was bereft alike of speech and strength, whereas the wolf, if first seen by the man, became an easy prey. The side from which a wild beast approached was also of moment. Thus, the Geoponica warned its readers not to allow a hyena to approach from the right side, lest one be rendered motionless by the fascination of its presence, but if it appeared on the left side, the animal might be attacked with confidence. Various wonderful tales are current among the natives of Senegambia and other districts of Western Africa regarding the lion. This noble animal, it is said, forbears to attack a man who salutes him with a respectful gesture, and the same gallant instinct restrains the beast from harming a woman. In most lion-haunted regions, however, the natives do not have such implicit confidence in the courtesy and forbearance of wild animals, but trust rather to the efficacy of various amulets. The Kafirs of southeastern Africa, for example, on encountering a lion or leopard in the forest, proceed at once to nibble a so-called lion charm, which is merely a small bit of wood or root. And if the animal moves away without molesting him, the Kafir attributes his security to the magic power of the charm, not realizing that his escape is due to the natural dread of man, which is characteristic of animals generally. So, too, the priests of Mexico were accustomed to rub their bodies with a certain ointment which they believed to be an efficient protection against wild beasts, its pungent odor acting as a charm, so that they were enabled to wander unmolested amid the wildest solitudes. The skilled hunter, however, confident in his own prowess, depends neither upon the alleged gallantry of lions nor the potency of amulets, but rather on his trusty rifle. The belief in charms against noxious animals is widespread, for not alone in African jungles does this form of superstition prevail. It is found among civilized people as well, and more particularly in southern lands. Indeed, wherever venomous creatures abound. In a collection of amulets belonging to Professor Joseph Bellucci of Perugia, Italy, which was exhibited at the Paris Exposition 1891, were a number of perforated stones and other objects used by Italians as charms to protect the bearer against the bite of serpents and reptiles. Roman 8. Legal prosecution of animals. Legal proceedings were formally instituted against vermin, who were thus treated as if they were human beings endowed with consciences and responsible for their actions. Prosecutions of animals were common in France and Switzerland, with a view to protect communities from their depredations. Thus, rats and mice, and also bulls, oxen, cows, and mares, sheep, goats, pigs, and dogs, moles, leeches, caterpillars, and various reptiles were liable to punishment by legal process. The Roman Catholic Church claimed full power to anathematize all animate and inanimate things, founding its authority on the scriptural precedents of the malediction pronounced on the serpent in the Garden of Eden, and the cursing of the barren fig tree by our Lord. The belief in the moral responsibility of animals was also thought to be warranted by the old Mosaic law as declared in Genesis chapter 9, verse 5. And surely your blood of your lives will I require. At the hand of every beast will I require it, and at the hand of man. Also in Exodus chapter 21, verse 28. If an ox gore a man or a woman, that they die, then the ox shall be surely stoned, and his flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be quit. In the code of the Spartan lawgiver, Lycurgus, and in that of the Athenian legislator, Draco, provision was made for the formal trial of animals for misdemeanors. A vestige of the unreasonable belief that brutes and even inanimate objects were accountable for their actions is to be found in that now obsolete term of English law, deodand, meaning, according to Blackstone, a personal chattel, which was the immediate cause of the death of a rational creature, and for that reason given to God, that is, forfeited to the crown to be applied to pious uses. The deodand was of Grecian ancestry, as appears from the ceremonies connected with the offering of a sacrifice by the Athenians. When the animal or victim had been dispatched by an axe in the hands of the officiating priest, the latter immediately fled, and to evade arrest he threw away the axe. This instrument was then seized by his pursuers and an action entered against it. The advocate for the axe pleaded that it was less guilty than the grinder who sharpened it. The grinder laid the blame on the grindstone which he had used, and thus the whole process became a farce and a mockery of justice. We learn from the writings of the Benedictine monk Leonard Ver that in certain districts of Spain in the 15th century, when the inhabitants wished to drive away grasshoppers or noxious vermin, they chose a conjurer as judge and appointed counsel for the defendants, with a prosecuting attorney who demanded justice in behalf of the aggrieved community. The mischief makers were finally declared guilty and either duly anathematized or formally excommunicated, the technical distinction between the two sentences being doubtless to them a matter of profound indifference. At this point also, prosecutions of pigs or sows guilty of devouring young infants were not uncommon. Barthélemy Chassenot, a famous French advocate of the 16th century, first won distinction by the originality of his pleas in defense of some rats in a notable trial at Autun. He represented to the judge that his clients found it extremely difficult to obey the summons issued to them by the court, owing to their being obliged to traverse a region abounding in cats, who were, moreover, especially alert on account of the notoriety of the legal proceedings. Chassenot wrote that the people of Autun had long agitated the question how best to rid the province of Burgundy of locusts, and he expressed the belief that a sure method of accomplishing so desirable a result was by the scrupulous payment of all tithes and ecclesiastical dues, and by causing a woman to walk barefoot round the infested fields. After the 17th century, prosecutions of animals and the use of incantations for their expulsion became less common. The ritual of Siege in 1743 forbade such practices without the special permission of the Church, but the same volume contains a formula for driving away grasshoppers, maybugs, and other insects. Mr. C.G. Leland states in his Gypsy Sorcery that exorcism has been vigorously applied in the United States, not only against the Colorado beetle and armyworm, but also for the suppression of blizzards and the grape disease. It has not had much success hitherto, probably owing, as he naively remarks, to the uncongenial climate. End of section 15.
Section 16 of the Magic Horseshoe. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Lee Vogler. The Magic of the Horseshoe by Robert Means Lawrence. The Luck of Odd Numbers, Part 1. For there is luck in odd numbers, says Rory Moore. Samuel Lover. 1. Early significance of numbers. In the Kabbalah, or ancient mystic philosophy of the Jews, much importance is attributed to the combination of certain numbers, letters, and words. According to one tradition, the earliest Kabbalah was given by the angel Raziel to Adam and orally transmitted through generations until the time of Solomon, by whom it was first embodied in written form. Another report alleges that the Kabbalistic secrets of nature were received from God by Moses in the Mount and afterwards taught to Joshua, who communicated them to the 70 elders, and they have since been treasured by the initiated among the Jews. According to the doctrine of the Pythagoreans, the unit or monad was regarded as the father of numbers, while the duad or two was its mother, and thus is explained one source of the general predilection for odd numbers, the father being esteemed worthy of greater honor than the mother, and the odd numbers being masculine, while the even numbers were feminine. Moreover, the unit being the origin of all numbers, represented divinity, as God was the creator and originator of all things. It was also a symbol of harmony and order, whereas the duad signified confusion and disorder and represented the devil. Plutarch remarks in his Roman Questions that the beginning of number or unity is a divine thing, whereas the first of the even numbers, deux or deuce, is directly opposite in character. As for the even number, said this writer, it is defective, imperfect, and indefinite, whereas the uneven or odd number is finite, complete, and absolute. The belief in the lucky significance of odd numbers is of great antiquity, and reference to it is made by Virgil in the 18th Eclogue and by Pliny, who comments on its prevalence in his time but offers no explanation therefor. The Roman king Numa Pompilus is said to have added days to certain months in order to make an odd number. It is related, moreover, that the Emperor Julius Caesar, BC 100 through 44, having been once thrown out of his chariot through some mishap, refused thereafter to set out upon a driver journey until he had thrice repeated a magic formula, and this practice appears to have been commonly in vogue in those days. The persistency of a traditional belief is exemplified by the modern association of luck with uneven numbers, and probably the goddess Fortune herself preferred a three-legged stool. However this may be, it is evident that the legions of her worshippers today are firmly convinced of the mystic charm inherent in triplets. The Chinese pagodas, or sacred towers, built by devout persons with the object of improving the luck of a neighborhood, have always an odd number of stories, being from 3 to 13 floors high. In Siam, also, this superstition holds universal sway, and its influence in the construction of buildings is especially noticeable, for the Siamese religiously adhere to odd numbers in architecture, and every house must have an uneven number of rooms, windows, and doors. Each staircase must have an uneven number of steps. In the early literature and mythology of the northern nations, much importance was attached to the numbers 3 and 9, which were held especially sacred and dear to the gods. This fact is shown in their religious ceremonies, and more particularly in their sacrifices, which occurred every 9th month. Each sacrifice, moreover, lasted 9 days, and each day 9 victims, whether men or animals, were offered up. 2. The number 3. 3, as emblematic of the Trinity, has always been considered a sacred number, and long before the Christian era, God was worshipped as a triple deity. This is true not only of the Assyrians, Phoenicians, Greeks, and Romans, but also of the ancient Scandinavians, the Druids, the inhabitants of Mexico and Peru, as well as the Chinese and Japanese. So from the earliest times, the Hindus have worshipped their triad of Brahma, Vishnu, and Siva. In Holy Writ we find 3 sister virtues, faith, hope, and charity, and in classic mythology are trios of graces, fates, and furies, the 3-forked lightning of Jupiter, the 3-headed dog Cerberus, and the trident of Neptune. The tripod was anciently a symbol of prophecy and of divine authority, and the triangle was originally the pagan emblem of a holy triad. The peculiar significance of the number 3 was due partly to the fact of its being the first uneven number containing an even 1, and from the importance formerly attributed to it may have originated the familiar saying, "The third time never fails." In several codes of ancient Welsh laws are numerous so-called triads, of which the following are curious examples. 3 things which a villain is not at liberty to sell without permission of his lord: a horse, a swine, and honey. 3 things not to be paid for, though lost in a lodging house: a knife, a sword, and trousers. There are 3 animals whose tails, eyes, and lives are the same worth: a calf, a filly for common worth, and a cat, excepting the cat that shall watch the king's barn. Among the ancient Irish also, considerable importance was attached to the number 3. Thus we read that among the household officials of the High King of Erin were 3 royal jugglers, 3 jesters, 3 head charioteers, 3 equerries, 3 swineherds, 3 janitors, and 3 drink bearers. Multiples of the mystic number 3 were much employed by witches in their incantations, and they are even now a favorite with the Chinese, who have a saying that 1 produced 2 and 2 produced 3, while 3 produced all things. This partiality is illustrated in the dimensions of the Temple of Heaven in Pekin, where 3 and 9 constantly reoccur. In a book entitled Varieties by David Person, London 1635, being a survey of rare and excellent matters, necessary and delectable for all sorts of persons, the author comments at some length on the significance of certain triads. Among others, he mentions 3 things incident to man: to fall into sin, which is human; to rise out of it again, which is angelical; and to lie in sin, which is diabolical. Again, 3 powerful enemies, the world, the flesh, and the devil, which constantly assail man, should be opposed by 3 efficient weapons: fasting, prayer, and almsgiving. Thomas Vaughan, in his Anthroposophia Theomagica, has much to say concerning virtues of numbers. Every compound whatsoever, he says, is 3 in 1, and 1 in 3. In speaking of a natural triplicity, however, he does not wish to be understood as referring to kitchen stuff, those 3 pet principles, water, oil, and earth, but to celestial hidden natures known only to absolute magicians. In Northumberland, smooth holly leaves, gathered late on a Friday, are collected in a 3-cornered handkerchief and carried home. Then 9 of the leaves are tied into a handkerchief with 9 knots and placed under the would-be diviner's pillow, and as a result, interesting revelations from dreamland are confidentially anticipated. In another magical ceremony, a maiden before retiring sets 3 pails of water on the floor of her bedroom and pins 3 holly leaves on her left breast. She will then, conformably to the popular belief, be awakened from her first nap by 3 loud yells, followed by 3 hoarse laughs, whereupon the form of her future husband will be revealed to her. The supposed efficacy of these rites doubtlessly depends chiefly on the use of the magical holly, but the repetition of odd numbers is also characteristic of charms, incantation, and mystic procedures in all ages throughout the world. 3. The number 7. The number 7 has ever been regarded as having peculiar mystic significance, and its manifold virtues have been the theme of elaborate monographs. Alike in Holy Writ and among the earliest historic peoples in classic antiquity, and in the mythologies of many nations, the number has been most prominent, and to this fact may reasonably be attributed a portion of the luck associated with odd numbers in general. A complete enumeration of familiar examples of the use of this favorite number, though germane to our subject, would be beyond the scope of this sketch, but a few instances may be appropriately given. The origin of the respect accorded this number by the nations of antiquity was probably astronomical, or more properly, astrological, and arose from their observation of the 7 great planets and the lunar phases changing each 7th day. Saturn is first, next Jove, Mars third in place, the Sun is mist, fifth Venus runs her race, Mercury sixth, Moon lowest and last in band, the planets in this rank and manner stand. It was a saying of Hippocrates that the number 7, by reason of its mystic virtues, tended to the accomplishment of all things, and was the dispenser of life and the fountain of all its changes. For as the moon changes its phase every 7 days, so this number influences all sublunary beings. The phase to be in the 7th heaven was derived from the 7 planets, which were believed by Babylonians to be carried around upon as many globes of crystal, the 7th being the highest. In the writings of the Kabbalists of old are likewise portrayed 7 heavens, one above the other, and the 7th or highest was the abode of God and the higher angels. The ultimate source of sanctity of the number 7 has, however, been ascribed to the septentrions, the 7 ploughing oxen, the stars of the constellation of the Great Bear. An ingenious but not especially plausible reason alleged for popularity of this number is the fact of its being composed of 3, the number of sides of a triangle, and 4, the number of sides of a square, thus representing 2 of the simplest geometric figures. Certain biblical critics of a speculative turn of mind have concluded that its prominence as a symbol is due to the emblematic significance of its compound parts, 3 and 4, the former representing divinity and the latter humanity. In other words, the union between God and man, as affected by the manifestations of the divinity in creation and revelation. In some portions of a great work on magic, discovered by Mr. A. H. Layard among the fragments of clay tablets in the ruins of a palace in ancient Nineveh, are many incantations, formula, and conjurations in which the number 7 occurs repeatedly. As familiar instances of the prominence of this number in former times may be cited the 7 wise men of Greece, the 7 gates of Thebes, and the legend of the 7 sleepers of the Epheus. Other examples are given in the following 7 heroic verses sent by a certain Mr. Michaelburn to one Mr. Crisp, who owed the former 7 shillings. Friend Crisp, I send you verses only 7. The number's odd, God numbers loves uneven. 7 hills at Rome, 7 mouths of Nilus are 7 sacred arts, the world's 7 wonders rare, the week's 7 days, the heavens 7 trions show, but one thing rests, 7 shillings you me owe, which that you'll pay, 7 verses I bestow. In ancient Ireland, every well-to-do farmer had 7 prime possessions, a house, a mill or a share in it, a kiln, barn, sheep pen, calf house, and pigsty. The number 7 appears more than 300 times in the Scriptures. God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th, and throughout Old Testament as well as in the Apocalypse, the constant reoccurrence of this sacred number is noteworthy. Thus we read of the 7 fat and 7 lean kine of Pharaoh's dream, and also of the count of the fall of Jericho, Joshua, verse 4, and 7 priests shall bear before the ark 7 trumpets of ram's horns, and on the 7th day ye shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with the trumpets. According to a popular medieval tradition, Adam and Eve remained but 7 hours in Eden. 7 archangels are mentioned in the Bible and in Jewish writings. Michael, who was the special guardian and protector of the Jews, and whose honor the festival of Michaelmas is celebrated on the 29th day of September by the Anglican and Roman Catholic churches. Gabriel, the messenger who appeared to the Virgin Mary and to Zacharias. Raphael, spoken of in the book of Tobit as the companion and guardian of Tobias. and conqueror of the demon Asmodeus, Uriel, an angel mentioned in the book of Esdras, Shammel, who according to Jewish traditions wrestled with Jacob, Japhel, who expelled Adam and Eve from Eden and who was the guardian of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and Zadkiel, an angel who was supposed to have stayed the hand of Abraham when the latter was about to sacrifice his son, Isaac. Samson's strength resided in 7 locks of his hair, representing the 7 rays of light, the source of strength, and the shearing of these 7 locks by Delilah, a woman of low character, has been described as a triumph of evil in suppressing light. According to Herodotus, the Arabs of the desert had a peculiar method of confirming a vow of friendship. 2 men stood on either side of a third, who made incisions with a sharp stone on the palms of their hands, and having dipped in the blood thereof from some portion of a garment of each, he proceeded to moisten with it 7 stones lying on the ground. In the age of the world, and the opinion of learned men of former times, was properly divided into 7 great epochs, namely, the first from the creation of Adam to the deluge, second from the latter event to the time of Abraham, third from Abraham to the exodus of the children of Israel, fourth from that time to the building of Solomon's temple, fifth from then to the Babylonish captivity, sixth the period between that and the coming of our Lord, seventh from the beginning of the Christian era to the end of the world. According to astrologers, man's age was divided into 7 parts, governed by 7 planets. The first part, infancy, comprised 4 years and was ruled by the moon, a weak, moist, and changeable body. Next came childhood, a period of 10 years governed by Mercury, a planet indifferently good or bad, according to the character of the planets with whom he was associated. Following this came youthhood, from 14 to 22, over which Venus presided. Next was adolescence, lasting 20 years and ruled by the sun, and in this age man attained his full strength and vigor. The fifth, from 42 to 56, was called manhood, and was under the dominion of Mars, a bad star. At this time men began to wax angry, impatient, and avaricious, but were more temperate in their diet and more discreet. The next period of 12 years was called old age and governed by Jupiter, a noble planet whose influence rendered men religious, chaste, and just. The 7th was the decrepit old age ruled by Saturn. In the Lambeth Palace Library there is a manuscript of 15th century in which the 7 chronological hours are compared to the 7 periods of human life as follows: morning, infancy; mid-morrow, childhood; undern, school age; midday, knightly age; nones or high noon, kingly age; mid-overnoon, elderly age; evensong, declining age. In The Secrets of Numbers by William Ingpen Gent, London 1624, the number 7 is described as the most excellent of all, for several notable and curious reasons, and prominent among these was the alleged fact that the soul consists of 7 parts, namely acumen, wit, diligence, counsel, reason, wisdom, and experience. 4. Odd numbers in witchcraft. Odd numbers are intimately associated with the black art, for witches' incantations are commonly repeated 3 or 9 times. Who ever heard of a witch performing any of her mystic rites exactly 4 or 6 times? Apropos of this may be quoted the following story, taken from advanced sheets of a work entitled Galsby, edited by Edward W. B. Nicholson, M.A., Bodley's librarian in the University of Oxford, England, and loaned to him by the writer. The book contains much interesting folklore of the extreme north of Scotland. A woman who lived near Galsby was always telling her neighbors that a woman whom they all believed to be a witch had cast an evil eye upon the cow and herself. Her milk and butter were spoiled, she said, and she also told them that in a dream she saw the witch in the shape of a hare come into her milk house and drink the milk. One day when she was in the wood for sticks, her neighbors went into her byre, and seeing her petticoat on a nail, cut a number of crosses on it and put it on the cow's stall. Then they tied 9 rusty nails to a cord with 9 knots on it. This cord they tied to the chain on the cow's neck, then went away. Shortly after the woman came home, she went into the byre, and seeing the petticoat, nails, etc., ran out to her neighbors, screaming and calling them to go and see what the witch had done on her. To make sure that it was the witch's work, she showed them the unequal number of nails and knots. Then she took everything she thought the witch had handled and made a fire of them, saying that she could no longer harm any person because her power was destroyed by the fire. The employment of odd numbers in magical formula is exemplified in the following recipe for a drink against all temptations of the devil, used by the Saxons in England. Take Petoni, bishopwort, luppets, gitthrift, adderthorn, wolf's comb, yarrow, and lay them under the altar. Sing 9 masses over them. Scrape the warts into holy water. Give the man to drink at night, fasting, a cupful, and put the holy water into all the meat which the man taketh. Work thus a good salve against the temptations of the fiend. A Hindu woman, on returning with her young child from a strange village, is careful, before entering her own dwelling, to pass 7 small stones 7 times around the baby's head and throw them away in different directions in order to disperse any evil which may have been contracted during her trip. As a preliminary to other mystic procedures in order to avert the evil eye, the Hindus wave around the patient's face 7 pebbles taken from a spot where 3 roads meet, 7 leaves of the date palm, and 7 bunches of leaves of the boar tree. It should not be surprising that such mysterious rites, whose efficacy depends chiefly on the magical potency of certain odd numbers, should be popular among the natives of India, but it is noteworthy that these numbers are equally influential in the Christian lands. A multiplication of examples might serve to emphasize this fact, but would occupy too much space. Charms and formulas are commonly thrice repeated, probably in reference to the Holy Trinity. Of all the numbers arithmetical, the number 3 is held for principle, as well as natural philosophy, as supernatural theology. The Bavarian peasant, in passing through a haunted place, considers himself amply fortified against evil if he takes the precaution to carry 3 things, namely, 1, a new knife which has never cut anything, marked on the blade with 3 crosses. 2, a loaf of bread baked on Epiphany Eve. 3, a black cat. End of section 16.
Section 17 of The Magic of the Horseshoe. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Magic of the Horseshoe by Robert Means Lawrence. The Luck of Odd Numbers, Part 2. Part 5. Odd Numbers in Folk Medicine. In a volume containing a great variety of ancient charms and magical cures, collected by Marcellus Empiricus, a Latin writer of the 4th century A.D., in which volume various remedial measures are described with great minuteness, the even numbers seldom appear. Thus, for the removal of a foreign substance from the eye, one should rub the affected organ with the 5 fingers of the hand of the same side, and repeat thrice a charm of words. Again, for the cure of a sty on the eyelid, take 9 grains of barley and poke the sty with each one separately, meanwhile repeating a magic formula in Greek. Then throw away the 9 and do the same with 7, throw away the 7 and do the same with 5, and so with 3 and 1. The early Saxon physicians in England seem also to have had faith in the peculiar virtues of the number 9, as is evident from many of their prescriptions, of which the following prefix to a lengthy Latin charm is a fair specimen. For flying venom and every venomous swelling, on a Friday, churn butter which has been milked from a neat or hind, all of one color, and let it not be mingled with water. Sing over it 9 times a litany and 9 times the Pater Noster, and 9 times this incantation. In an ancient English manuscript, Harleian Collection number 585, frequent examples are given of the employment of odd numbers in therapeutics. Thus, for dropsical affections, a beverage containing Alexander, betony, and fennel is to be drunk daily for 7 days. To expel venom, centauri is to be taken for 15 days, and a potion prepared from the seed of cress is extolled for its curative qualities if taken faithfully during 3 days. Indeed, the odd numbers are prominent in the annals of folk medicine throughout Great Britain. The 3 chief duties of a physician were declared to be as follows: the restoration of health when lost, its amelioration when weak, and its preservation when recovered. So also 3 qualities were requisite in a surgeon, namely, an eagle's eye, a lion's heart, and a lady's hand, attributes equally essential to the skillful operator of the present day. The natives of the Hebrides inherit the old Scandinavian and Celtic partiality for certain odd numbers. Thus, in Tiree, a favorite cure for jaundice consists in wearing a shirt previously dipped in water taken from the tops of 9 waves, and in which 9 stones have been boiled. These same people formerly employed a peculiar method of treating sick cattle. The veterinary, holding in his hands a cup of cream and an oat cake, takes his seat upon the animal and repeats a Celtic charm of words 9 times, taking a bit and a sip before each repetition. In Cornwall, for the cure of inflammatory affections, the invocation of 3 angels is thrice repeated to each one of 9 bramble leaves, and a popular remedy for whooping cough is to pass a child 9 times under and over a 3-year-old donkey. In the south of England, for intermittent fever, the patient is recommended to eat 7 sage leaves on 7 successive mornings, fasting meanwhile, and in northern Scotland, scrofulous affections are thought to yield to the touch of a 7th sun, when accompanied by an invocation of the Trinity. The belief in the magical curative qualities of the number 9 was not limited to the northern nations. Thus, the inhabitant of ancient Apulia, when bitten by a scorpion, proceeded to walk 9 times around the walls of his native town. Dr. D.G. Brinton, in his Nagualism, a study of Native American folklore and history, remarks that the number 9 recurs very often in the conjurations of Mexican magicians. The women of Canton, China, attribute magical properties for the cure of cutaneous affections to water drawn after midnight of the 7th day of the 7th month. When a gypsy child bumps its head, a knife blade is first pressed upon the swelling, after which an incantation is pronounced 3, 7, or 9 times, and the knife is stuck into the earth a like number of times. Many charms employed by gypsies could be mentioned in illustration of the avoidance of even numbers in all their mystic rites. Part 6. The number 13. In regard to the luck of odd numbers, the exception, which is commonly supposed to prove the rule, is the much maligned 13. In the Scandinavian mythology, Loki, the principle of evil and the chief author of human misfortunes, accompanied the 12 Aesir, or demigods, and was reckoned the 13th among them. Moreover, the Valkyrs, or virgins, who waited upon the heroes in Valhalla, were 13 in number, and from these sources is believed to have sprung the very common superstition concerning the ill luck and fatality of the number 13, especially in connection with a party of guests at table. The most generally received explanation of the origin of this popular belief refers it to the Last Supper of our Lord, where Judas is sometimes represented as the 13th guest. But why Judas rather than John, the beloved disciple? However, this is the generally accepted starting point of this notable superstition. As with the Jews, the 13th month, and with the Christians, the 13th day of the year, which began with Christmas, were accounted ominous, so with the inhabitants of India, the 13th year was considered to be of evil import. It is evident, therefore, that the source of this nearly worldwide belief cannot be attributed wholly either to the mythology of the North or to the Paschal Supper. When the year was reckoned as 13 lunar months of 28 days each, the number 13, according to one view, was considered auspicious, but when under the present method of solar time, the number of months was reduced to 12, 13's reputation was changed for the worse. In early times, the feast of the Epiphany, which is the 13th day after Christmas Eve, was feared because at that time the three goddesses, Berchta, Holly, and Bifana, with their ghostly companions, were especially active. And as a guard against their machinations, the initial letters of the names of the three kings or wise men were written on many a door. Of the former trio, Berchta was represented as a shaggy monster, whose name was used as a bugbear with which to frighten children. She was entrusted with the oversight of spinning, and on the eve of Epiphany she visited the homes of the country folk, distributing empty reels, which she required to be filled within a specified time. If her demands were not complied with, she retaliated by tangling and befouling the flax. Holly or Holda was a benignant and merciful goddess of an obliging disposition, who was usually most lenient, except when she noticed disorder in the affairs of a household. Her favorite resorts were the lakes and fountains, but she had also an oversight over domestic concerns, and shared with Berchta the supervision of spinning. Sometimes, however, she appeared as an old hag with bristling, matted hair and long teeth. Bifana, the third goddess, was of Italian origin, and her name signifies Epiphany. On that day, the women and children used to place a rag doll in the window in her honor. In personal appearance, she was black and ugly, but her disposition was not unfriendly. So universal has been the superstition regarding the number 13 at table that it has long been a matter of etiquette in France to avoid having exactly that number of guests at dinner parties. The Parisian picassiette, a person whose title corresponds to the English trencher friend or sponger, is also known as a quatorzième, his chief mission being to occupy the 14th seat at a banquet. The ancients, we learn, had ideas of their own regarding the proper size of festive gatherings, their favorite number of convives being between 3 and 9, the number of the Graces and Muses respectively. Opinions have differed as to whether misfortune were likely to befall the whole company of 13 persons rash enough to dine together, or only the one leaving the room first after the repast. All evil, however, was supposed to be averted by the entire company rising to their feet together. It has been wittily remarked that the only occasion when 13 plates at table should cause disquietude is when the food is only sufficient for 12 persons. At the 13th annual dinner of that unique organization, the 13 Club, held in New York City, January 13, 1895, at 7:13 o'clock p.m., the custodian delivered an address in which were recounted the circumstances of the club's formation. So prevalent was the apprehension of evil likely to result from the assembling together of 13 persons that, when at length the requisite number were seated at table, it was found desirable to lock the doors of the banquet room, lest some faint soul should retire abruptly. Field Marshal Lord Roberts, in his 41 Years in India, Volume 1, page 24, mentions a circumstance occurring in his own experience which affords evidence, were any needed, of the falsity of the superstition in question. On New Year's Day, A.D. 1853, Lord Roberts was one of a party of 13 who dined together at a staff officers' mess at Peshawar on the Afghan frontier. 11 years later, all these officers were alive, the greater number having participated in the suppression of the great Sepoy Mutiny of 1857, during which several of them were wounded. In Italy, shrewd theatrical managers have found it expedient to change the number of box 13 to 12A, and in many streets of Rome and Florence one may search in vain for house numbers between 12.5 and 14. A gentleman of the writer's acquaintance living in Washington, D.C., sent a formal petition to the authorities asking leave to change the number of his house for the sole reason that it contained the ominous figures. As an illustration of the popular distrust of the number 13 among the villagers of the department of Ille-et-Vilaine, France, may be cited the following custom, which is in vogue in that district. Children are there usually taught the art of knitting by devout elderly women. The little ones are first seated in a circle, and to facilitate the work, on the completion of the first round of knitting, they are made to repeat the following words: 1. The Father, at the close of the second round, 2. The Son, and so on as follows: 3. The Holy Spirit, the 4 Evangelists, the 5 Wounds of our Lord, the 6 Commandments of the Church, 7 Sacraments, 8 Beatitudes, 9 Choirs of Angels, 10 Commandments of God, 11,000 virgins, 12 apostles, and at the close of the 13th round the children mention the name of Judas. This remarkable and unreasonable prejudice against an innocent number seems to pervade all classes and communities. The possession of intelligence and culture is no effective barrier against it. Arguments and reasoning are alike vain. Even at this writing, an evening journal records that at a recent meeting of a newly elected Board of Aldermen in an enlightened city of eastern Massachusetts, one of the members objected to casting lots for seats because he did not relish the idea of drawing number 13. However, his scruples having been in a measure overcome, he was much relieved to find that the number 11, which is both uneven and lucky, had fallen to his share. Brand quotes as follows from Fuller's Mixed Contemplations, 1660, in reference to this subject. A covetous courtier complained to King Edward VI of Christ College in Cambridge that it was a superstitious foundation, consisting of a master and 12 fellows, in imitation of Christ and his 12 apostles. He advised the king also to take away 1 or 2 fellowships, so as to discompose the superstitious number. "Oh no," said the king, "I have a better way than that to mar their conceit. I will add a 13th fellowship unto them, which he did accordingly, and so it remaineth unto this day. Persians regard the number 13 as so unlucky that they refrain from naming it. When they wish to allude to this number, instead of mentioning the proper term, they use words meaning much more or nothing. The Moors or Arabs of northern Africa have similar prejudices, whereas the American Negro, ordinarily a most credulous being, appears to be quite indifferent to the evil influences of the fateful number. But in Turkey, so great is the popular dislike of it that the word for 13 is seldom used. In Scotland, this number is known as the Deil's Dozen, a phrase which has been supposed to have some connection with card playing, there being 13 cards in each suit of the Deil's books. John Jamieson, in his Scottish dictionary, avows his inability to trace the superstition to its source, but believes that it includes the idea of the 13th being the devil's lot. The number 13 is also sometimes known as a baker's dozen, because it was formerly a common practice to give 13 loaves for 12, the extra piece being called the inbread or two-bread. This custom is supposed to have originated at a time when heavy fines were imposed for short waits, the additional bread being given by bakers as a precautionary measure. In certain cases, contrary to the general rule, 13 is accounted a fortunate numeral, or even as one possessing extraordinary virtues. Dr. Daniel G. Brinton, in A Primer of Mayan Hieroglyphics, page 25, says that in the old language of the Mayas, an aboriginal tribe of Yucatan, the numbers 9 and 13 were used to denote indefinite greatness and supreme excellence. Thus, a very fortunate man was possessed of 9 souls, and the phrase 13 generations old conveyed the idea of perpetuity. The demon with 13 powers was a prominent figure in the mythology of the Chantals, a Mayan tribe. According to a widely prevalent popular impression, a brood is usually odd in number, and therefore it is folly to set an even number of eggs under a hen. In spite of the falsity of this idea, it is still quite customary to set 13 eggs, an even number in this case being accounted unlucky. Gerald Massey, in The Natural Genesis, remarks that there were 13 kinds of spices set out in the Jewish religious service, along with the zodiacal number of 12 loaves of shewbread. There are 13 articles to the Hebrew faith, and the Kabbalists have 13 rules by which they are enabled to penetrate the mysteries of the Hebrew scriptures. 13 are the dialectical canons of the Talmudical doctors for determining the sense of the law in all civil and ecclesiastical cases. In England, the day of 24 hours was formerly divided into 13 parts, as follows: 1 after midnight, 2 cock-crow, 3 between the first cock-crow and daybreak, 4 the dawn, 5 morning, 6 noon, 7 afternoon, 8 sunset, 9 twilight, 10 evening, 11 candle time, 12 bedtime, 13 dead of night. Recurring now to the prevalent notions regarding the sinister and portentous character of this number, one may well inquire in all seriousness whether the harboring of this and other firmly rooted superstitious fancies is compatible with a deep and abiding Christian faith. The answer is plainly in the negative. Therefore it is doubtless true, and the truth should make us free, that the greater our indifference to the various alleged omens and auguries which so easily beset us, the more readily shall we acquire and retain a firm and enduring dependence on divine providence. End of section 17. End of The Magic of the Horseshoe by Robert Means Lawrence. Thank you for listening.